What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka Poppy Dwirl.
What's going on?
And today we are talking about artificial sweeteners. All right, Dwayne, how we doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm super glad to be talking about artificial sweeteners. I've had several companies try to bottle me, for sale, for over-the-counter sales, but it's just not working out, man. I don't know. So, I'm so sweet, man.
You're not
sweet.
cashing in those checks from Big Sweetener yet?
Well, Imperial Sugar. I was trying to work a deal with Imperial, but it didn't. Yeah, they didn't go for it at all. They
didn't go for it. That's a bummer. Yep.
That's funny. That's funny.
All right. Well, today's topic is our first requested topic.
Awesome.
And so I tried to do my best. It was kind of a little bit of a limited information request. They weren't really quite sure the specifics of what they were looking for out of this, but I'm going to do my best, and we're going to keep this kind of high level. So a lot of times I'll pull up a study or two, and we'll get really, really deep into those. We're not going to do that this time, but I do have studies referenced in here. So we're going to get into it. So the question was kind of generally about what are artificial sweeteners or sweeteners in general. How are they made? What are some of the differences between them and what we would call nutritive sweeteners? So we kind of have two categories: non-nutritive and nutritive. We'll talk about that. And then what are some of the potential health concerns or things that we should be worried about with these things? So let me share my screen.
Artificial sweeteners have been around for a long time. I remember when I was a kid, and I won't tell you how long that was ago, but I'll just put it this way. Moses and I were in high school together. And my grandmother would get these little, it was a little bitty jar, and it would have like these little bitty, tiny little white tablets. And she would just put one of those into her iced tea, and it would dissolve, and she'd stir it around, clank, 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 and it would be sweet. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. And then one time when she wasn't looking, I snuck one of those, just like, I thought, man, that's got to taste good. So
like a sugar cube?
Oh, but it was tinier. It was smaller than that. It was like a baby aspirin or smaller. It was just a tiny thing. So I snuck one of those out of that bottle, and I popped it into my mouth, and oh my gosh, it was horrible, man. It was nasty, bitter. It was like,
yeah,
it was horrible. So I just couldn't understand how something so nasty would be so sweet in an iced tea. But yeah, and that was like, I think that was called saccharin back in those days.
Saccharin. Yep, that's one that we're going to talk about. So so in my digging, artificial sweeteners have been around for quite a long time. The first artificial sweetener, I think, was discovered in the mid 1800s.
Wow.
And so it was I forget the gentleman's name and all that stuff, but it was kind of discovered by accident. So he was working with some coal tar, of all things, and he was trying to create an ulcer preventative medication from the different chemicals that are in coal tar. And so he ended up discovering this thing by accident. So some of the chemical or whatever he was working with spilled on his hand. And when he figured out that it wasn't toxic, he just kind of didn't worry about it after that. And he kept having these spills on his hand. And one day he went to either turn a page in a book, or some of the stories vary, but he licked his finger and it was sweet. And so that was kind of the first discovery of artificial sweeteners.
Wow.
From man-made chemical sources.
Wow.
Yeah. So So for all the listeners out there, again, today, I'm not going to go deep into the studies or anything, but there are studies linked here. And what I am going to link in the show notes is this mind map that I created as I was doing the research. So I really like making mind maps. They kind of make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to everybody else. But if you haven't used this app called Mind Node, you have the mind map here. Let me see if I can zoom out. And you
Wow.
create a map like that. Or if you are a little bit more book or note oriented, it will create an outline like this.
Cool.
So
Cool.
very, very useful, handy tool. When you're doing research, you really want to dig deep into something, and I'm currently working on something with a mind map right now that hopefully we can reveal soon. It's a little complex, but for the listeners, there's something to look forward to in the future. So let's get into this. So we have nutritive sweeteners and we have non-nutritive sweeteners. And basically what that means is some of these contain calories and some of them don't. Okay. And for the nutritive sweeteners, we can think about these like our sugar. And so the first thing I have here is high fructose corn syrup, because that seems to be the nutritive sweetener that has all of the contention in the world today. And so we're not going to go too much into these, but I have a list of some of the things. So we have sugar, which is sucrose, which is our table sugar, which you think of white table sugar. And that comes from either beets or cane sugar. And in the United States, primarily we get our table sugar from beets, not from cane sugar anymore. And then some alternatives to that, we have coconut sugar, honey, maple syrup, date syrup, agave nectar, brown sugar, and brown rice syrup. And that's not an exhaustive list. There are others, but that's just kind of what I think is probably the normal stuff that people use. And so I've gone ahead and I've listed the fructose and glucose concentrations within each of these sugars. And before we get into that, there's something else I want to know. So there's a notion that some of these alternatives are healthier than table sugar. And one of the reasons for that is because of the processing or the way that it's manufactured, so to speak. And it's important for people to know and understand that all of the syrups, so if you find a sweetener in a liquid form, a natural nutritive sweetener that's in liquid form, all of the syrups are made the same way, which is basically a process of you're either crushing fruit or whatever holds that sugar in it, and then you're kind of steeping it like you would in tea. So it's just steeped in some hot water or something. And then the water is removed to a certain degree to where you have a liquid syrup. They're all made that way. Okay. And all of the granular sugars, so coconut sugar is often touted as being a healthier option. And one of those reasons for the healthier is because of the way it's made. All of the granular sugars are made the same way as well. So you would do that same process where you're kind of steeping this plant and removing the sugar from it that way, and then you evaporate off the water, and what you're left with are the granules. So manufacturing process for all of these things is the same. So any claims made about health on the basis of the way it's made are false, because they're all made the same way. Okay, so high fructose corn syrup is kind of the devil of sugars nowadays. And so when we hear high fructose corn syrup, we tend to think like 95% fructose, right? It's high fructose. But in reality, it's 55% fructose, 45% glucose. Now, table sugar, so these would be, the fructose molecule is a monosaccharide, and the glucose molecule is a monosaccharide, mono being one. So these molecules are independent of one another within this syrup. Okay. Table sugar, on the other hand, is what we call a disaccharide. So di being two, mono being one, di being two, is 50% fructose, 50% glucose, and those are linked together. that creates our disaccharide. Okay. So high fructose corn syrup is 55% fructose. Table sugar is 50%. Coconut sugar, 50% fructose. Honey, depending on where you get it and the time of year and the bee and all that stuff, on average, 55% fructose.
Love me some honey, that's for sure.
Definitely. Maple syrup, 50% fructose. Date syrup, 50% fructose. Agave nectar, 75% fructose.
Wow.
Brown sugar, 50% fructose. Brown sugar, now actually brown sugar is just white table sugar with molasses added to it. So it isn't a different type of sugar, but 50% fructose. And brown rice syrup is actually 5% fructose. So on the basis of fructose being the devil, high fructose corn syrup being the essence of the devil, we can see that all of these sugars basically have the same amount of fructose in them, right? Aside from agave nectar, which is, 25% higher, and brown rice syrup, which is, almost no fructose in it. Why are you laughing?
The devil, the fructose devil.
I mean, you hear that's what it is online. High fructose corn. Oh, we're all getting fat and diabetic because high fructose corn syrup is fructose.
Oh, geez.
Eat this sugar instead. All right.
Okay.
Now our non-nutritive sweeteners. These are kind of split up into two categories here. So some non-nutritive sweeteners aren't exactly non-nutritive. They do contain some amount of calorie, but it's very, very minuscule. So we have some that are extracted from plants, and we have some that are actually made from chemicals. They're man-made from chemicals. So going into the plant extracts first here, we have allulose, monk fruit, stevia. We have sugar alcohols, and there's a bunch of those. And then we have kind of new to the market here are called sweet proteins. And these I have a lot of high hope for. And I hope that they become more available and replace some of the stuff in our current food system here. But how are most of these made? Okay, so allulose is made from corn or fructose, so, high fructose corn syrup. And that's made through a process of fermentation. Our monk fruit is made from monk fruit. They call it monk fruit sweetener. And then it's kind of the same process as the other sugars. The fruit's crushed and then it's steeped like a tea is. And then that water, the what you have left over, that liquid, is filtered and then it's distilled. And so what you get at the end of that is kind of the pure sugar from that monk fruit. Stevia comes from the stevia plant or the Bertoni plant. Same process. They steep the leaves just like you would any tea, and then they distill that water. Our sugar alcohols are made from various different fruits and berries and things like that, and those are made through a process of fermentation, and it's chemical modification of the glucose and sucrose. All right, and so for the sugar alcohols, we have arabinitol, erythritol, glycerol, isomalt, lactitol, maltitol, sorbitol, and xylitol. I'm sure somebody has heard of those somewhere. Those are pretty common in a lot of drinks.
Yep.
And then our sweet proteins, they are made by a process of fermentation, and we have brazine, thaumatin, monolin, curculin, mabinlin, pentadin, and those are made from various plants. Most of those plants come from Africa. So we can see here that most of our plant extracts are made through either distillation or fermentation.
Does it seem like all the fermentations have some kind of chemical interaction in the processing?
Yeah, so that's kind of what fermentation is. It's a natural, so to speak, chemical modification.
But they add things to it, don't they?
No.
In that fermentation process, they don't.
They have to add some enzymes to create the fermentation.
Okay.
But once the fermentation process happens, they'll remove those enzymes. They'll remove everything except for the sugar substance that they're looking for afterwards.
Oh, okay, because I had high hopes for the monk fruit and stevia. I mean, that's just straight up steeping in water.
Yeah, so I mean those are made through distillation, kind of the same way that you make moonshine, like
I
it's
don't know
pretty
anything about that.
it's a pretty basic, yeah, it's a pretty basic process. You can do it at home. I did find several videos where people were making their own sugar at home. So even from beets, people made beet sugar.
Right,
Um, and couldn't get it quite as white as you get it in the package at the store, and
right,
that's
right.
mainly just due to the sophisticated level of manufacturing that bigger companies have. So doing it at home, he was still able to get it pretty white. It had a slight brown tinge to it.
Right, right.
But the report was like it tasted just like sugar. You couldn't even tell it came from beets,
Cool,
and he was
cool,
pretty happy with it. So
cool.
yeah, so our chemical
Did you want to skip that bottom section there? Up there, the sweet potatoes.
sweet
Oh,
proteins.
we went into that,
Yeah, I
didn't we? We
talked
already
about
said
those.
that. Oh,
Yeah.
my bad, my bad, oh, my bad.
Yeah. And there's a company right now, I think they're called Uni, OONI, and they make a drink where they're using the sweet proteins to sweeten that drink, and they're kind of the biggest promoter of it right now in the United States. So I have high hopes for this because it's actually a protein. It's not a sugar, so to speak. And maybe important to tell people right now too. So I talked about saccharides, so monosaccharide, disaccharide. So this term sugar that we use is kind of an umbrella category for well, it's an umbrella term for a category of carbohydrates, which are saccharides that are sweet to the taste. So all carbohydrates are saccharide. We have monosaccharide, disaccharide, polysaccharide, oligosaccharide. So all carbohydrates, every carbohydrate you eat is a saccharide, and sugar is just an umbrella term for a specific category of that is sweet to the taste.
Cool.
All right, getting into our chemically made sweeteners here, and this is probably the stuff that people are most concerned with. So these are made through a process of chemical synthesis. They are man-made. We do modify chemicals. So we have at the top here acyl sulfame potassium, which is ACE K. I think that is the one that was the first discovered, is ACE K. We then have saccharin, aspartame, sucralose, and then we have some other ones which have been banned since the 1950s and 1970s. So I didn't go farther than those, but to list them here. So we have cyclamate, dulcin, and P4000.
Mm.
That must have been a powerhouse.
Yeah, just that name. Mm.
Yeah. So starting at the top here, so Ace K, some brand names that you would associate with Ace K are Sweet One and Sunset. And I have found here the ADI, which is the acceptable daily intake, and that's 15 milligrams per kilogram. Okay, so it would be 1,020 milligrams for a 150-pound person. And basically, what that translates to is that a 150-pound person can consume 26 tabletop packets of sweetener per day, or roughly 5 diet sodas that are sweetened with ACE K. Okay. And the ADI, the acceptable daily intake, is 100 times lower than what is referenced as the no observable adverse effect level. So what they'll do is they'll take usually rodents, and they will feed them this thing in higher and higher doses until they reach a point where they start to notice adverse effects. And then they'll find that no adverse effect level. All right. So I can feed it up to this point and we don't see anything happening in the rat. And they'll take that level and they'll divide it by 100 to give you your ADI. So for everybody out there listening, what is recommended for you to consume or to stay below is actually well below the tolerable level that's been found. Okay. So you could actually consume a lot more than what's put down here and not have any effect. And that's per day. Okay. So 26 packets of sweetener per day for the rest of your life, not have
That's
any
nasty.
effect.
Can you make the
Yeah.
screen just a little bit bigger? There. Whoa. Yeah, that's maybe not quite that big. Just a
Not
little
quite
bit
that big.
small. Just a little bit smaller. So we can get a whole bracket in there. That's good, right there. Perfect.
Okay. So ACE K is made by a chemical reaction of floral sulfonol isocyanate with either acetylene derivatives or with active methylene compounds. All right. ACE K is not digested or absorbed by the body. It's not absorbed by the body. It's excreted by the kidneys. An interesting finding here, it's actually used to estimate what degree swimming pools are contaminated with urine.
That's nasty. I don't want to put that in my body, dude. I don't want to put that into my body. Bah.
All right. Next up, we have saccharin. And some brand names for this would be Sweet and Low, Sweet Twin, and Sweet, the letter N apostrophe low, and Nectasweet. And then the ADI for that is the same as ACE K, 26 packets or 5 diet sodas. And this is made oxidizing the chemicals of O-toluene, sulfonamide, and phthalic anhydride.
I'm not putting that in my body either.
So this is a process of oxidation. Okay, so ACE K is a chemical reaction. So they'll put these chemicals together in a vat and allow them to react. Okay, and what you get out of that, I think this is the one. No, it's aspartame. That's the one. Yeah, so they're put in a vat and the chemicals are allowed to react. And then what we get out of that, they'll also go through a process of filtration and everything else, just like the plant versions, where they're removing what's not needed out of that chemical reaction and just coming up with the sweetener itself. All right. And then saccharin is a process of oxidization. Aspartame, which is probably the most common one that we have. Brand names would be NutraSweet, Equal, and Sugar Twin. The ADI on this is well above anything. It's 3,400 milligrams per, or I'm sorry, 50 milligrams per kilogram, which would come out to 3,400 milligrams for a 150-pound person. And a 12-ounce Diet Coke, for reference, has 200 milligrams of aspartame. So that means a 150-pound person could safely consume 88 and a half tabletop packets of sweetener or 17 diet sodas per day. This is made by combining 2 amino acids, aspartic acid and phenylalanine. Now, amino acids are what make up protein structures. So aspartame, even though it is in the category of synthetic, so chemically made, processed by chemicals, we also see that the first action in the processing of this is fermentation. So there's a fermentation, and I didn't get too deep into what they use to do all of this stuff. Okay, so but they ferment some stuff to get these 2 amino acids. That's the first step. And then what they'll do is they'll separate the amino acids by spinning that concoction in a centrifuge. All right. And then those amino acids are separated out. And then the acids are modified in ion exchange columns. And then those are pumped into reactor tanks, heated, and allow the chemical reaction to take place. Okay. And then what you end up with are crystal structures, and the crystals are filtered, and then they're converted to aspartame by reacting with acetic acid. So all of the quote unquote chemicals that are being used to make aspartame are actually naturally occurring. They're not man-made chemicals, but it fits in the man-made category because of the way it's made. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hey, so can you go back one category? I mean, one product there. I think it's back to the sweet and low. So just for grins, I looked up otoluene sulfonamide
Mm-hmm.
and So it's a major impurity in artificial sweetening substance containing saccharin. But then if you go down and look at what it's used for, O-toluene sulfonamide is primarily used as a plasticizer due to its ability to improve stability, flexibility, salt resistance, and flow property in resins. I don't want that in my body. That's
This is
nasty.
good. This is good that you bring that up. So we're not very far into this, but that is something that comes up as a concern, is that because this thing is found in something like resin, that perhaps it will cause adverse effects on the body. So logically, at first thought, like that kind of makes sense, right? Because resin,
Yeah,
you probably don't want to be drinking resin
yeah,
or other, synthetic chemicals and things of that nature.
yeah.
And therefore, the derivatives that make up that chemical thing probably aren't necessarily that good for you either. However, water makes up the main portion of antifreeze.
That's true. That's
It's
true.
also it's also used in the making of a lot of synthetic components.
That's true. That's true. That's
So
true.
just like our plant-based meat alternatives, where the notion is that because it has a certain number of chemicals or ingredients,
Right,
or that a person may find that those ingredients are unnecessary or perhaps sound scary,
right.
doesn't necessarily equate to the health effects of the food that contains that ingredient
Okay,
or the food additive in this case.
okay.
So no, that's good. That's good that you brought that up, right?
Right.
All right,
just for just
sucralose.
just
Yeah.
for reference, your camera went out.
Biscuits. All right.
Sucralose.
Yeah, so going down to sucralose, so brand name for this would be Splenda. The ADI on that is less than anything else. It's 5 milligrams per kilogram. So for a 150-pound person, that means you can consume 26 tabletop packets of Splenda or 5 diet sodas per day. So we can see that amongst these artificial sweeteners, that although the ADI, the milligram per kilogram, may differ among them, it doesn't kind of change the amount of packets or artificially sweetened things that we could consume. And the reason for that is the amount of sweetness compared to sugar that each of these has. So some of the stuff like so sucralose, for example, because it has the lowest ADI, 5 milligrams per kilogram, the amount sweeter that is than sugar, it would be more sweet. So it would be, let's say, 500 times sweeter than sugar. So
Hmm.
you actually don't have to use that much of it.
Hmm.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
that's why the ADI can be very low. And the amount of packets and whatever you get is because you don't have to put as much sweetener because it's that much more sweet. Okay. And compare that to aspartame, where the ADI on that is really, really high. Now, the ADI is really, really high because, and I'm just going out on a limb here, because we are actually making it from amino acids and acetic acid, which are naturally occurring substances, right? So even though the process of making it is a synthetic process, it is a man-made sweetener, the ADI can be very high because those amino acids don't have deleterious effects on the body until they would reach really, really significantly high levels, right?
Right. Right.
And so that allows you to consume a lot more of that sweetener versus some of the others where it's 5 milligrams for sucralose and then 15 milligrams for saccharin, but that doesn't change the number of packets or the number of diet sodas, so to speak, that you could change per day, because how much they are sweetening that soda compared to sugar is how much you would put in there, right?
Right. I have a question, and it's kind of in a short story, but I can ask it later, or I can ask it now. What would you rather me do? And it has to do with aspartame.
Uh, let me go over how sucralose is made
Cool. Let's
real
do it.
quick. Yeah, so
Cool.
sucrose, so regular table sugar is modified by selectively substituting 3 atoms of chlorine that are on the sugar molecule for 3 atoms of chlorine that are not on the sugar molecule for 3 hydroxyl groups that are on the sugar molecule. So there are hydroxyl groups on the sugar molecule, and they selectively target which ones, and they remove those and they replace them with chlorine.
That's weird.
Okay, so that is a man-made process. It's almost like you think about gene editing or something. Okay, so sucralose is actually made from sucrose. And all they're doing is substituting 3 atoms. So, your story.
So wait, so substituting chlorine basically gives it well, it just kind of magnifies its sweetness. It intensifies
I
it,
think
right?
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
the thing. Yeah.
Okay. So I can't, I mean, this is a story, so I can't substantiate it, but I've heard it from more than one source.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it was during Iraq, the Iraqi war, or if it was in Afghanistan that due to popular demand, a particular diet soft drink was sent to the soldiers, and um, the pallets were they came in on, just cases and cases and cases of it, sat outside for a while in the heat, and soldiers really loved that diet soft drink, and so they drank a lot of it. But they found that it was making the guys really groggy and sleepy and just lethargic. Do you
Mhm.
have any knowledge of that story,
Um,
or
I
or is it
I
a wives' tale,
don't
or
I don't have knowledge of that story. It does make sense, however, because aspartame is not a very heat stable source. So you're not going to find aspartame in baked goods.
ah,
You're
okay,
you would not you would probably find the Ace K or sucralose in a
okay,
baked good because those are more heat stable. So what happens to aspartame is that because it's made of these amino acids,
right,
and then there's also um, methylene involved, and we're going to get down into this into the health concerns about these things. Is that when it's heated or when it's digested, that the molecule itself, the aspartame molecule, actually breaks down into those constituent components. So you
ah.
no longer have aspartame, you have these 2 amino acids and then a methylene
So it breaks down the
molecule.
compound into
Yeah,
okay,
it's
okay,
broken
cool,
down into those things. So there, theoretically, if you were to drink soda that was sitting in the sun for a long time, that you could have an effect of fatigue similar to the way that drinking alcohol might produce a fatigue effect.
right, right,
And we're going to talk about in the health section of this.
cool,
So, but that goes over our chemical synthesis process involved here. So for most of these, it's generally going to be a chemical reaction by combining these chemicals in a vat or a reactor and allowing that chemical reaction to take place. So you brought up resin, so it'd be kind of like the same process of resin. So you have a part A and a part B, and they're
right,
both liquid. And then when you mix them, a chemical reaction takes place, and you now have a solid matrix structure, right?
cool,
So
understood.
that's kind of the way that all of these things are made. Now, getting down into our health concerns. Um, so most positive findings are in rodent studies, and they're used to create the no observable adverse effect level. What I mean by positive findings are the findings that link X sweetener to X health outcome, like cancer or some other type of disease. So that's what I mean by positive findings. Okay,
Right.
so those are mostly found in rodent studies where they are trying to find the level at which we start to see weird stuff happening. Okay. Positive human studies are generally epidemiological and are most likely explained by reverse causality. And the majority of human data is hard to combine to create a consensus. So what I mean by that is the information that we have linking sweeteners to cancer or other things are more than likely caused by reverse causality. And we'll talk about the weight gain instance here, but people who generally tend to be more overweight, more sick, more prone to getting cancer, developing cancer, or other health issues, on general, tend to drink artificially sweetened beverages and other things more than the healthy population does.
Wow.
Right. So just because we see that two things are happening together doesn't necessarily mean that the one is causing the other. And so I had that book last time on causality.
Right.
And so one of the things that's in there is called the causality boat. Let me see if I can. Yeah, the one that's in the book isn't coming up, but let me see this one. This one might help. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here we go. Okay. So we have a boat and we're looking to identify causality. Now, let's say you're standing on the shoreline of a really, really big lake, okay? Like one of the Great Lakes, Lake Huron or something like that. And you're observing this boat and you have a wind that's coming head onto you from the water onto the shore, okay? And you're watching this boat sail away from you. And what you observe from the shore is that this person continues to move the rudder left and right, right? But the boat continues to go straight. Now, from observation, we would see that the wind is coming directly at the boat. It's directly at us. The boat is heading directly away from us. The wind is coming towards us. This person is moving the rudder left and right. Obviously, the wind has no effect on the boat, so the rudder must be broken, right?
Well, that's what you would think.
That's what you would think. What we don't have is the information about what the wind is doing at the boat.
Right.
So we see sometimes that things might track with each other and sometimes things don't track with each other. But it's the information that we don't have that can lead us to the wrong conclusion.
Right.
Okay. So the wind out on the water, it may be going right to left at one point, going left to right at another point, coming head on in another point. And because you're standing on the shore and you don't have the information that that sailor has at the rudder, leads you to the wrong determination.
Right.
Okay. So what you think is the causal factor for the rudder moving around actually is not. Okay.
Right.
So when we see the human outcome data be linking artificial sweeteners to these health outcomes, cancer and disease and diabetes and all kinds of things, often can be explained by the fact that the people who are more likely to get those diseases are generally consuming more of those types of foods rather than the healthy population who is unlikely to develop those things due to having lower body mass, due to exercising more, right? All of these things that we would contribute to a healthy lifestyle. But it's not necessarily that the artificial sweetener is causing these things in these people.
Right. So in my mind, I'm just going to throw this out there, and it's probably not even worth talking about, but I'm just going to throw this out there that for example, with the boat causality, so we don't understand, like you said, we don't know what's happening out there with the wind or what the wind is doing or the atmosphere is doing at that distance, but we just see the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then our human reaction to that is always to go to the worst. Not everybody does that, but most of us go to the worst. So if we see people who may have a weight issue or they're prone to cancer, or there are other factors involved, then we're going to go straight to the worst. Oh my gosh, that diet drink is killing them. We
Right.
should all stop drinking diet drinks.
Right.
That's kind of what you're saying too, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That so from the consumption of food, that's generally where we tend to see the effects happening, or the correlation between artificial sweeteners and health outcomes. We also have from the industry workers themselves. So when you are exposed to these chemicals environmentally
Right.
rather than dietary, you're exposed to much larger um, concentrations of
Right.
these chemicals. And so then the likelihood that you're surpassing that no observable adverse effect level
Right.
becomes tremendously greater, right? We see this with chemical pesticides all the time. It's not necessarily people who are eating the food that the chemical was sprayed on, but it's the farm worker who is out spraying it that's the one
Right.
getting the cancer. And
Right.
so what gets trickled down through the media and through social media and everything else then is we start to get a filtration of information happening where the context and the important details are left out, and what we end up with is artificial sweetener causes cancer.
Right. 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 It just goes back. It also goes back to my story about the diet soft drink being shipped to
Right.
Afghanistan or Iraq. Oh my gosh, this is what diet soda does to you.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
no, because we didn't talk about the heat.
Yes. So
Okay.
context is important in
Right.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Got it.
Yep. And so here I have linked I believe this is a scoping review, which kind of looks at, it doesn't have exclusion criteria. It just kind of looks at all of the information that's available on the topic and kind of gives you a broad overview of what that is. And so that's where I got this determination here. But there really is no, there is no consensus amongst the scientific literature as to do these things, have adverse effects or not. There just isn't a consensus
Right.
because the type of data that we have coming in isn't homogeneous enough to combine to create any kind of conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So some of the things you'll hear online or from your friends or the news or whatever, I've kind of put down here. And again, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the outcomes that we are hearing about with, why you should avoid artificial sweeteners. So we have methanol, though, and I put though because that's basically what the argument comes down to. Is like, well, why shouldn't I drink this? Well, methanol, though, right? It spikes your insulin, though.
Well, I was wondering
What?
what the heck is dough? What
Yeah, weight gain,
is
though. The gut microbiome, though. Cancer, though. Glucose dysregulation, though. Neurotransmitters in the brain, though, and banned in Europe, though.
oh my gosh, that's the killer right there.
That's the killer. So let's start down here. Banned in Europe, though. All right. This seems to be a pretty common argument online about you shouldn't consume X thing because it's banned in Europe. 99% of the time, that person is full of, you know what? They don't know. Okay. And so I'm going to provide everyone a link to the European Food Safety Authority where you can go and you can look up these things. Now, sometimes we're really concerned with food additives, and
Right.
sometimes those things have different names in Europe. Okay. Most of these things will go by an E designation. So it's a letter E and then a number. And that's why people can't find it, or they think
Hmm.
that it's banned in Europe, is because it's
Right.
under an E designation.
Right.
Oh, banned in Europe, though. So we're going to come all the way back up here. Our sucralose is E955.
Yeah.
Aspartame is E951. Saccharin is E954. ACE K is E950. All of our sweet proteins, all right,
967, 57. Yeah.
thaumatin is E957. The rest of them don't have an E designation. I'll get to that. Our sugar alcohols, they all have E designations except for arabinitol. Stevia is E960, monk fruit, and allulose. Here, I'm going to talk about the ones that don't have E designations. Now, some of these don't have E designations because they're relatively new to the food system, and they are awaiting approval in Europe. They are most likely going to be approved. Okay, so arabinitol over here in the sugar alcohols, we can see that the rest of them have been approved. There's really no standing as to why arabinitol would not be approved. Monk fruit is awaiting approval as a food additive. Allulose is actually not considered an additive since it is a saccharide. It actually contains calories, and it is not banned in Europe. Okay, but it is awaiting approval as a food ingredient. So it will never have an E designation because it is not considered an additive. And then for our sweet proteins, again, these are all really, really new, and they're just awaiting approval. Okay.
Right.
Again, these are going to be, I think, far safer from a health standpoint than many other sweeteners, and so I don't see any reason why they won't be approved.
Right.
Okay, so on the basis of banned in Europe, though, we can see it's just flat out false.
Right.
Almost all of this stuff is approved in Europe. The person telling you that just doesn't understand how food additives are categorized in Europe. This is also a flaw in logic. There are many reasons why a country might place a ban on a food or over-the-counter medications that have nothing to do with its effect on health. And for an example, are you familiar with the I don't know how to say it, Kinder or Kinder egg, where it's like a plastic shell. So it's a candy. It's like a plastic shell, and it comes in two halves. One half has a toy, and the other half has like a chocolate.
It's the Kinder egg.
Yeah, the Kinder egg.
Yep.
So what we have in America is the Kinder Joy egg. And in Europe, they have the Kinder Surprise egg. Now, the Kinder Surprise egg is actually banned in America. And the reason for that is the surprise egg that is approved in Europe is actually a chocolate egg shell, kind of like a Cadbury bunny shell, Cadbury bunny egg. And the toy is inside the chocolate shell. So the reason that is banned in America is because they don't want little kids eating the chocolate and then choking on the toy.
Right.
Okay. So the reason something may be banned in another country may not have anything to do with health effects.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
There are lots of reasons why countries ban stuff, and a lot of them have nothing to do with health effects.
Just like the causality vote.
Just like the causality vote. So neurotransmitters in the brain, though, and I have several linked studies on this, which all show that there's really no effect on neurological function in the brain to most of these artificial sweeteners. Most of the evidence that people are going to cite is going to be in rodent models, again, using really, really, really high intakes where we are trying to find the level at which weird stuff starts happening. Okay. Something about rodent models that we've never discussed before. The carryover from rodent experimental models to actual human outcome is about 6%. So 6% of the experiments that we do on rodents have any carryover to human effects.
That's a super low percentage.
It's a super low percentage. The amount of drugs that are introduced to the system every year that actually make it to first phase clinical trials is about 5%. So I just want you to think about how many drugs that we actually have that are approved by the FDA, that have gone through clinical testing, all that stuff, they've been determined safe by humans, all the drugs that are out there. That's only about 5% of what is proposed, of what the experiments that we do.
Wow.
Something to think about.
kind of scary, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. At least there's a filter. Who knows what all is being proposed out there?
Yeah. So we only have about 6% of carryover into humans. And so if the claim is that non-nutritive sweeteners have an effect in humans, the question would then be, why don't we see it in the
Mm-hmm.
data?
Right.
Okay. I've looked through, there's not there's not anything that I could find on human beings as
Right.
far
Right.
as neurological function. Okay.
Right. Right.
And again, we have no available evidence to suggest any food additive or ingredient creates an addiction. So that's another thing about these things. Oh, it creates an addiction because of neurological whatever.
Right.
There's no evidence that we have that any food additive or ingredients that we use actually create addiction. What we're talking about is like to heroin, right?
Right. Right.
We
Could
have glucose dysregulation, though.
could you make that a little bit bigger, please?
Yeah.
It got small on me. Okay,
How's
good.
that?
Thanks. Good. Perfect. Thanks.
So here's all the linked studies that I found. And I didn't go through everything, right? I linked 2 or 3 for each of these so that everybody can see that there are multiple different laboratories finding the same results. Okay. And so that's kind of the basis on how I link some of these studies. So glucose dysregulation, though, we're going to see insulin. And I'm going to go over all of that. It's going to make sense. Cancer, though, right? That's the big one. So I have some
Yeah.
included things here. So of the non-nutritive sweeteners that have been shown to cause cancer, all of them have been banned. And we can go back up here. We can see these fellas here. Those were all shown very, very early on in the 1950s, 1970s. We knew that these things caused cancer. They have been banned. All right.
Yep.
Now, we currently had the IARC, which is part of the WHO, the World Health Organization, classify aspartame as a category or a group 2B carcinogen. Okay. And so if we, let me see. If we look here at what these groups are, we see group 1 is carcinogenic to humans. Group 2A is probably carcinogenic to humans. Group 2B is possibly carcinogenic to humans. Group 3, not classifiable as its carcinogenity in humans. So aspartame has been put into the group 2B. And this group, where they put this stuff is based on limited evidence in humans. Okay, so that means there's almost none. And there's less than sufficient evidence in animals. So on the basis of where they categorize this, there's practically no evidence that it's carcinogenic. Okay. What else is in this group? We have aloe
2A,
vera
2B?
in 2B.
Yeah.
We have aloe vera leaf extract, marine diesel fuel, gasoline, engine exhaust, Asian pickled vegetables, progestin, and perennial use of talc-based body powders. I think hot beverages also fit into this category. All right. So don't get bent out of
Wow.
shape because the IARC classifies something. All right. Group 2A, let's look at what's in here, right? There is sufficient evidence the agent causes cancer in human. Sufficient evidence the agent causes cancer in human. Anabolic steroids, high temperature frying, human papillomavirus, red meat, Roundup, which is our glyphosate, Actose, I don't know what that is, and NDMA, I don't know what that is either. All right. And then group 1, which is carcinogenic, there is sufficient evidence that agent causes cancer in humans. We have solar radiation, processed meats, alcohol beverages, smoking, asbestos, talc-based body powders contaminated with asbestos. All right. So we can see how they're grouping things. All right. And group 2B is, there may be a little bit of evidence which is where we find that epidemiological association between cancer and aspartame. Okay. But it's limited. It's limited evidence, and there is less than sufficient evidence in animals. So do I think aspartame is something that you need to worry about on the basis of cancer? I don't think so. As long as you, are staying within the ADI. All right, we have the gut microbiome, though. Now, most people who reference the gut microbiome don't have any idea what they're talking about. But I have some articles here, or rather some studies, where you have different laboratories performing tests on these things, coming to generally the same conclusion. And there is not a clear consensus because of the study design of current trials are so dissimilar that there can't be any clear conclusions drawn. Now, what we do know is that some of these things do alter the bacterial species and so forth that are in our gut microbiome. What we don't know is whether or not those changes are bad or whether or not they're significant. All right, our weight gain, though, they'll cause you to gain weight. And again, this is explained by reverse causality. People who have weight to lose are going to be drinking diet sodas or artificially sweetened beverages and foods more than people who do not have weight to lose, specifically because they are trying to lose weight. Right? So we see an association between artificial sweeteners and overweight and obese people, but that does not mean that the artificial sweeteners caused the overweight and obesity. We have spikes insulin, though. I love this one. This one and the glucose dysregulation. Okay. So if we're going to think about this logically, and this a lot of the time comes from low carbohydrate proponents, but more often it's just general healthy eating disorder type proponent. So what does insulin do? Insulin transports glucose and other things into our cells. Okay, main thing we're concerned with here is glucose. So if we consume some artificial sweetener, and the notion is that you are sensing something sweet, and so your brain and your body thinks that it's receiving sugar. Now, there is an immediate, so upon tasting something sweet or upon tasting food, there is often an initial insulin response to that in order to kind of get things going until stuff starts to digest, make it into your bloodstream, and then the amount of glucose within the circulatory system is picked up and sensed by the pancreas and the liver, and then the appropriate amount of insulin is dosed. Okay, so there is an initial response of insulin before you even start eating and digesting anything. Now, let's say that we drink some artificial sweetener. Your brain thinks it's getting sugar, kicks on the insulin. A high insulin response would create a hypoglycemic event because you are not consuming any glucose for that insulin to transport into the cells. That insulin is going to transport your normal, the glucose that is your relative baseline. Okay, so you always have glucose floating around your system. That's what your fasting glucose number is. And so if you have this high insulin spike, it would take the normal level of glucose that you have and it would dump it all into the cells and you would become hypoglycemic.
Yeah, dizzy, fatigue.
Vomiting, shaking, paleness. Now, because we do not see people drinking diet sodas and not eating anything, experiencing bouts of hypoglycemia, we can pretty much put to bed the notion that it creates a high insulin response. Right? That does not happen.
Right.
Okay. Let's say that there's a low insulin response. So we have this initial insulin response. When it touches our tongue, our brain gets the signal, sugar is coming in, start putting out some insulin, right? So that we don't experience this hyperglycemic event. So again, a low insulin response would create a mild state of hypoglycemia because you are having an elevation in insulin in your circulatory system. There is no glucose coming in, so it's going to take the normal baseline glucose that you have and transport that into cells. Now, it's not going to be as much as a high insulin response because there's not as much insulin. However, this would trigger through a series of cellular cascade events the response of the opposite hormone, which is called glucagon from insulin. So you have insulin, which lowers your blood sugar, and we have glucagon, which actually raises your blood sugar. So this low insulin response would trigger a mild hypoglycemic event, that then would be picked up by the pancreas and the liver, and that would signal glucagon to tell the liver to dump its stores of glucose to bring blood sugar levels back up. Make sense?
Yes.
So that we have our blood glucose returns to normal.
Yes.
Now, if you are of the camp or the ideology that glucose is bad and you need to have as little of it as possible in your body, you are now caught in a trap as to explain why this would be a bad thing. Right? Because
yes.
we are getting rid of some small amount of glucose within our body. Okay. And we are depleting our glycogen stores that would be stored in our liver and eventually our muscle tissue. And if you are of the notion that you should have as little of that in your body as possible, but you are against artificial sweeteners, you're now caught in a logic trap. Okay.
Yeah.
And what generally tends to happen then is most people will move the goalpost and they'll say, well, it's toxic chemicals. Toxic chemicals, though. Okay. And so for that, we go back to all of our other health claim references. Okay, toxic chemicals have what effect? Cancer?
Yeah. Maybe.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we come right back down here to the cancer section, and we know that the artificial sweeteners that have been shown to cause cancer at dietary levels have already been banned. We don't have sufficient evidence to form any kind of consensus on it. We have the IARC grouping as 2B, and we can see that you have just as much likelihood to develop cancer from Asian pickled vegetables as you do from aspartame.
Right. Right.
All right. Last but not least, we have methanol, though. So in our aspartame, this is the one that we're mainly concerned with, the methanol. So it has the 2 amino acids. Saying balloons. So we have the 2 amino acids there. Yeah. And there's also a methyl molecule. And all of those things get broken down and absorbed into the body. And the methanol is discharged through the process of the kidneys. Now, most people will cite this methanol as being a cause of concern. The problem here arises is that we naturally have a reaction of producing methanol to certain foods like grapes and tomatoes and stuff like drinking wine. And we have a higher rate of production by consuming tomato sauce or drinking wine than we do to what you get from aspartame, from drinking a can of Coke. So the equivalent amount of wine, so if I drink a 12-ounce can of Coke, or I drink 12 ounces of wine, I will get a higher dose of methanol from wine than I will from the aspartame. And the reason we would be worried about methanol is that tends to affect your vision. It tends to affect your eyes. I think there are some isolated cases of blindness or temporary blindness from that.
Right.
Okay. But on the basis of don't consume these because methanol or methyl, well, no, because you can actually have a higher dose of that from wine or tomato sauce.
That's amazing. Tomato sauce. Wow.
All right. So on the whole here, our non-nutritive sweeteners, whether you choose the kind derived from plants or whether you choose the kind that are synthetically made, generally tend to be safe at dietary levels in the manner that people are consuming them. Okay.
Right.
If you are looking to lose weight, they are a great way to replace sugar sweetened beverages that you are currently consuming in your diet, and makes your weight loss diet then less restrictive and more exponentially easier to stick to, right? It's easier to adhere to, and so you'll have longer term success doing that. Okay.
Yeah, easier to manage, right?
Yeah, if we just look at replacing sugar sweetened Coke with Diet Coke, and there are tons of people out there who have lost weight and they say the only thing I did was switch to diet soda, and people lose weight, right? And if that's all you have to do, that's a very, very easy method to do it. Now, do I think that this stuff should be replacing water in your diet? No, of course not. If you're using it as a weight loss, it should be, a temporary tool. At some point, you should have a plan in action to minimize the amount that you're having during the day. Okay. But on the whole, they're pretty safe. There's no reason to be afraid of them. And oftentimes going way out of your way to avoid them causes more harm, in trying to stick to really, really strict diets than it does any help.
Agreed. Some people have a misconception that a diet soda or even a regular soda will replace their need for just straight water.
Mm-hmm.
So some people do that with coffee as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I drink 6 cups of coffee a day. I'm good. No, you're not. No, you're not.
Yeah, you got to drink some water. It's hard. It's hard for me. I don't like plain water. But it's something you got to work at. But don't be afraid of the artificial sweeteners. Keep in mind that there is an acceptable daily limit, and you should probably try to keep them to a minimum for the day. How much is that going to be? Well, it's going to be dependent on your lifestyle. Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's productive to go way out of your way to really make the effort in trying to avoid them on the basis of anything you're going to hear online. Okay. If you want to do it just because you want to improve the quality of your diet, then that's a pretty good reason. And you can try by taking out small amounts of it on a regular basis, right? It's called titrating. So if you're drinking 6 cans of Diet Coke today, try drinking 5 cans for the next week. And if that's easy to do, then, the following week you can reduce it to 4. And at some point you're going to get to a place where you're like, okay, I still need to have 3 Diet Cokes a day in order to keep me sane and enjoy what I eat and everything. And so that's the place where you'll find, all right? You may never get to 0, and that's fine.
Yeah. This is good.
All right. Well, I hope that answers our listener's question. I thank you so much for asking it and bringing it in. And please, everybody else out there, if you have questions, specific topics that you want addressed, please send them my way, and I will do my best to answer them. So, as always, I hope somebody got something out of this. Dwayne, I hope I blew your mind.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
All right, and we will see everybody next time.
All right. See you later.
Lamby out.